Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to tell you a story, my story, regarding not what will happen, but what has already happened when we were otherwise occupied, not sufficiently observant of what was actually occurring. The book on which this story is going to be founded is called Technofeudalism, and the title, or actually the subtitle, which has created a lot of anger, especially amongst my fellow left-wingers. The subtitle is What Killed Capitalism? Because, you know, we left-wingers, we thought that we came to this world in order to overthrow capitalism. So there comes Varoufakis saying to other left-wingers that, you know what, capitalism has already been overthrown. And that didn't go down well with my fellow leftist Marxists. But I'm not here to please, I'm here to express that which I really do believe is happening to us. And it is a very serious moment in history. Of course, you may very well say, and you would be right, that every generation, every author, all of us, we would like to feel that we are on the cusp of a great transformation. And, you know, this is a delusion that everybody has suffered. All generations think that they were the generation when big things happened. But I do fear and think that our generation was unlucky enough to be on the cusp of such a great transformation. So, what am I going on about? Wherever we look, we witness the triumph of capital. Capital has steamrolled over the trades unions movement, civil rights movements, labor governments, social democracy, liberalism, even neoliberalism. Because, come to think of it, you know, the 2008 crisis and everything that followed after that was a complete defeat of neoliberalism. Neoliberalism was supposed to be the creed that the market knows best. Well, we saw what happens when you leave it to the market. Everything came crashing down, and you had, you know, the great and the good, the governments of the West, renationalizing or nationalizing in 2008, 2009, more sectors than Lenin ever did. So capital triumphed to such an extent, its triumph was so deep and so thunderous that it actually mutated, like a toxic virus which kills the host that keeps it alive. The mutation of capital that I want to talk to you about today has already killed the host, which is capitalism. So this is a great contradiction. Capital has never been more powerful than it is today, but it has been so powerful that it killed its host, capitalism. And what came in its place? My view, my hypothesis, is that a new system of producing, distributing values and power has sprung up, and the best way I can describe it is by this term, technofeudalism, which is not a very pleasant term, but then it's not a pleasant reality, and therefore I don't think we need pleasant words by which to describe it. So, let me get down to the nitty-gritty of it. I referred before to this great transformation. Well, the previous great transformation took place in this country. It was the Industrial Revolution, was it not? It was the great transformation, the great transition from feudalism to capitalism. It was a mind-boggling event in human history. It begat the modern world as we know it, with all its ills and all its great aspects. What was that great transformation all about? Under feudalism, you know that very well, you don't need me to say it, but just to establish some common ground, under feudalism, all power sprang from land ownership. If you owned land, substantial parts of land, then you had political power, economic power, discursive power, cultural power. Power was one thing. There was no such thing as a division between political power and economic power. If you owned land, then you had political power and you had economic power. And if you didn't have political power or economic power, that meant you didn't own any land. So the great cathedrals, wherever you look at, across Europe, in Britain, they were the result of accumulated ground rent. So if you had property, if you had land, you also owned essentially the communities that lived on that land. You had the political power to send the sheriff in and collect at the end of the harvest your share, that's your ground rent. If there were artisans working in your fiefdom, in your estate, you charged them for the right to be working and producing on your estate. So land was the source of power and wealth was accumulated ground rent. All the cathedrals, the castles, the House of Commons were all built on the basis of rent that came from property rights over land. Okay, that's feudalism. What happened with the Great Transformation? I'm not going to go into an analysis of how the transformation took place because then we would need another 2 such sessions for that. But with capitalism, the source of power shifted from ownership of land to ownership of machines. And wealth sprang not from ground rent anymore, but it sprang from profits. So with the Industrial Revolution, the first Industrial Revolution, it was the ownership of the steam engines. The railways. Later, with the second Industrial Revolution, it was the electricity grids and the telegraph poles and the telephone systems. And then later on with the vertically integrated mega firms like Henry Ford's or Westinghouse's and so on. So when we talk about capitalism, what do we mean? We mean a system where power comes from owning the machines that allow you to retain a residual after you've paid off your workers, your banker for the loans you've taken out, the landlord who owns the land that you pay ground rent. What you retain is the profit, and that profit is the source of all power under capitalism. It is this transformation from land and rent to machinery and profit that created the modern world, that created the hegemonic power of the United States, let's say today. My point now, in this talk and in this book, is that something quite remarkable has happened to capital in the last 15 years, 10 to 15 years. This is the mutation I was referring to before. Allow me to put it simply. Capital pre-existed capitalism by 10, 20,000 years. What's capital again? It's machinery. So, you fashion, you forge a plow and a tool. Why do you want a plow if you're a farmer? Because you want not to use it as an ornament, but you want to put it to use to plow the earth to produce corn or wheat. So the plow, the steam engine, the industrial robot today, they are all examples of capital goods, pieces of capital, in the sense that they are produced means of production. Things we produce, not because we want them, to use them as such, but only to produce something else. Produced means of production. A hammer, a plow, a tractor, a steam engine, an industrial robot, these are all produced means of production. Not this. What lives in here, and not just in here, in my phone, or your tablet, or your laptop, but also in the cell towers that allow for this to be networked with Google, with Meta, with Amazon, with Facebook, and so on. The optic fiber cables that are crisscrossing the earth, the oceans, the ocean bed, the server farms. If you go into a server farm owned by Amazon or by Microsoft, it is mind-boggling. I don't know whether you've ever seen anything like that. I remember visiting in somewhere between Washington State and Idaho, inside the guts of a mountain, a Microsoft server farm that was 1.5 kilometers long underground, so that it would be kept cool, with minimal electricity. And it was just like being in a James Bond movie. Something between being in a James Bond movie and in a factory. Lots of servers, very few workers, all automated, of course. But it's machinery, right? So when people say, I will upload something to the cloud, well, the cloud is a metaphor for this machinery that is all over the face of the earth, deep inside our oceans. It's machinery. So why is this different to capitalism? Well, because this machinery that I just described, allow me to call it cloud capital, to distinguish it from the steam engines, the plows, the industrial robots that are produced means of production. Now, what does this do? What does Google do? What does Amazon do? What does Uber do? What does Airbnb do? Well, using all this machinery, it allows for the owner of this machinery to engage us using the machinery. Now, this is quite spectacular per se. Think about it. Up until now, your relationship with capital, our relationship with capital, was always mediated via the market. So, you wanted to buy a car made by Henry Ford, you had to go to the dealership, you would buy the car. You never see the capital goods that built it, the production lines, unless you visited a factory. But you didn't have to visit a factory, right? So your relationship between you and Henry Ford's capital was mediated via the market. You had an advertiser who managed to convince you, to your detriment, that you needed to eat a Big Mac through one of these McDonald's advertisements. So when that happened, all you had to do was go to the McDonald's to get the Big Mac. So again, you'd have to go through the retail shop, through the marketplace. But what does Amazon do? Something very, very different. Has any one of you seen one of these Alexa machines that Amazon provides you with, Amazon Prime? It sits on your desk. You give it orders. You say to it, Alexa, tell me a story, or play some music, or switch off the lights, or what book should I buy? And when it says you should buy, not a book by Varoufakis, but by Malcolm Rifkin or somebody else. Well, bringing everything together, that machine behaves as if it is your servant, your slave, but it isn't. It is an interface, it's a portal to the cloud capital that belongs to Jeff Bezos, right? And what happens is, it receives all these instructions and questions from you, and because it is networked with all the rest of the machinery that I described before, it gets to know you. And then it finds ways of asking you questions that help you train it better to train you to train it better to know you. And at some point it starts giving you advice. I don't know about you, but when Spotify suggests music for me to listen to, I always like it. Sometimes I love it. Whereas when my best friends recommend music to me, I usually don't like it. The machine knows me better than my friends do. Same with Amazon and books. Amazon has never recommended to me a book which I didn't enjoy reading. Why? Because of this dialectical process. I train it to train me, to train it, to train me, to know me better. Once it knows me and it starts giving me advice which hits, the right spot, the right nerve, then it has won my trust. Subconsciously, I trust it. It has given me good advice before, better than my friends, so I trust it. So through this dialectical process, when I say, okay, Alexa, or I type in, or Siri, or not just Alexa, right? All these machines work in exactly the same way. When I type in electric bicycle and it comes up with a list of 3 or 4, these will be good for you. I will buy it. But I won't buy it from a marketplace. I will just click and the electric bicycle is going to magically appear at my doorstep. So think about it. Amazon resembles a cloud fiefdom where there are lots of buyers, lots of sellers. It looks like a market, but it is not, because there is no degree of decentralization. There is nothing like, you can't talk to other buyers. You cannot talk to sellers. You cannot choose the sellers. It's a relationship between you and the algorithm, Alexa. So the algorithm has a name, right? So you feel that it is like another human being, but it's not, it's an algo, right? And this algo does, let me just summarize everything I've said so far. It does the following. It trains you to train it to input desires into your soul and then satiates those desires bypassing every market. And why does it do that? Because Jeff Bezos collects 40% of the price you pay for the electric bicycle. He hasn't produced the electric bicycle. He takes it from the capitalist who produces the electric bicycle using proletarian labor and so on and so forth, right? But the profits, most of them, the bulk of the profits, are siphoned off the traditional capital owner. And that goes to the owner of the cloud capital who is not producing anything. So now we have a new form of capital that is not a produced means of production, but it is a produced means of behavior modification. That is no longer capitalism. Welcome to technofeudalism. Because I'm not arguing. Let me make this very clear, because people have said that, critics have said that, and it's not a fair criticism. I don't think I think it's a misleading criticism. I'm not saying we are going back to feudalism. This is not the point about the rise of technofeudalism. We've moved to a stage beyond capitalism, after capitalism, which has elements of feudalism in it, but only at the abstract level, at the conceptual level. What are these two elements? Well, remember I was saying that under feudalism, the source of power was ownership of land. Now, it is no longer ownership of land. Under capitalism, it was ownership of machinery. Today, it's still ownership of machinery. But it's this new form of mutant machinery, which is not a produced means of production, but it is a produced means of behavioral modification. So Bezos owns a machine that can modify my behavior, and owning that machine allows him to collect a rent from the capitalist that has produced, the traditional capitalist who has produced the electric bike. And why should you care about that? Well, you should care about that for at least 3 reasons. I could add another 10, but I don't have the time. Firstly, let's say you are a neo-Luddite. You say, you know what, technofeudalism is not my business because I don't have one of these phones. I have an old Nokia. It's not even connected to the internet. I pay with cash. I refuse to pay with cards. Go away with you and your cloud capital. All of you, not just me. Well, I'm afraid I have bad news from you. You cannot shield yourself from this. Why? Because if I'm right in my, if you want, statistical econometric analysis, that as we speak today, this is why I was telling you right at the beginning, that this is not a talk about what will happen, but it's a talk about what has happened. If I'm right in my estimation that around 35% of GDP, 35% of GDP in the West, but also increasingly in countries like Malaysia, Indonesia, right? Certainly in China, 30 to 35% of GDP is siphoned off by the Jeff Bezoses of the world in the form of this rent, which I call cloud rent, right? The rent that they charge sellers of electric bicycles, that we contribute to them because you know what? Take Facebook. Now, why is Facebook so valuable? Why does it have billions and billions of capitalization in the New York Stock Exchange? Well, the reason is because you are providing free labor for it. The code itself is nothing. We could go to the nearest university here in Wales, or Scotland or England or wherever, and we could get coders, computing scientists, that can actually code something better than Facebook. What is the capital of Facebook? It's the fact that there are millions of people on Facebook. Every time you upload something on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and so on, you are contributing to the cloud capital of that fiefdom. And, for instance, I am on Twitter still, even though Elon Musk has taken it and turned it into a sewer and called it X. Now, I can't get out of Twitter because I have 1.2 million followers. If I go to Blue Sky, which I have been, a tiny minority of people, just very, very few people will ever listen to what I have to say. So I'm stuck in that fiefdom, like a cloud serf belonging to Elon Musk. And every time I tweet something, I increase the cloud capital of Elon Musk. Similarly with Amazon, similarly with all of those platforms. So when 30 to 35% of the money we spend and the free labor we provide accumulates in the bank account of 7 companies in the world, the magnificent 7, so to speak, do you know what happens? That money is taken out of the circular flow of income. Because let me give you a fascinating statistic, which is the main reason I sat down and I wrote this book, when I discovered this number that I'm going to share with you now. If you take any of the traditional, let's call them terrestrial capitalist companies, like, British Aerospace, or Alstom, or Ford, right? General Electric, the traditional terrestrial capitalist firms. On average, 85% of their revenue goes to salaries, to the salaries of the members of the board, all the way down to the poorest worker with the lowest wage working for them. 85%. Do you know what percentage of its revenues Google pays to its workers? It's a radical number, 1%. Facebook, 1%. And moreover, let me tell you also something else. Do you know that 9 out of the $10 they have invested in their cloud capital comes from our central banks? Because in 2008, Wall Street and the City of London went pear-shaped, as did the banks of Paris and Frankfurt and so on. And our great and good leaders printed $35 trillion. That is 35,000 billion. 35,000 billion to give to the financiers. And the financiers, if you give them money, right, their greatest nightmare is that they won't be able to lend it. So they picked up the phone, they called the managing directors and the CEOs and the CFOs of various conglomerates, and they said, we have free money, take it. Yeah? Because the bankers got it at negative interest rates. Effectively, the central banks were paying them to take it. So even if they lent it at 0 interest rate, they were making money. You understand that, right? This was the crime against humanity. That was the bailouts of the financial sector after 2008. So all the CEOs took the money, because who would say no to free money? Except that those very CEOs then looked outside and saw you folks, me, all of us. And what they recognized was impecunious people because of austerity, because the largesse, the socialism for the bankers went hand in hand with austerity for everybody else. They realized, these people won't be able to invest in expensive top-of-the-line products, so we're not going to invest. They took the money from the central banks via the commercial banks, and you know what they did? They bought their own shares. Because if you buy your own shares, the share price goes up. Okay, if you're the CEO of a company, your bonus is linked to the share price. So that's what you do. But that's not investment. It doesn't create new jobs. It doesn't enhance the incomes of anyone. The only capitalists who invested in machinery were the owners of cloud capital, the Magnificent Seven. So effectively, we paid them to buy the machinery or to create the machinery, the cloud capital, which then encased us inside these cloud fiefs, where we produce free labor for them, happily and voluntarily. The worst kind of slavery is one you choose to have, so that they could siphon off 35% of global GDP. And you know, when you are not paying this in salaries, do you know what you do with this? You take it to the Cayman Islands. So this money comes out of the circular flow of income. And the result is bullshit jobs. Because aggregate demand comes down. Other capitalists, traditional capitalists, terrestrial capitalists do not invest because demand is down. The Bank of England has to increase money supply to keep a semblance of economic activity. That creates inflation, that increases the cost of living. So even if you have a Nokia phone and you don't have one of those phones, you are still subject to technofeudalism. Let me say that unless we understand that this is no longer capitalism, that this is something much closer to what I call technofeudalism, with these cloud fiefs, which look like markets but are not like markets, expanding to more and more sectors of our social economy. Unless we understand that, then we can't understand what's happening in the world around us. And let me give you some examples, very concrete examples. I'll give you 3. Okay, 1. Why is Volkswagen finished? Why is the German car-making industry gone? There is nothing that they can do to survive. One reason is, that, of course, because they didn't invest anything in the last 15 years. But it's not the main reason. The main reason is, if you compare, let's take an electric Volkswagen. There are some. Not as advanced as the Teslas or the BYDs, the Chinese ones, but there are. Let's say they improve them. They are still kaput. They are still incapable of competing with the American Tesla, Elon Musk's, or the Chinese BYD. Why? Because they're not connected to cloud capital. Did you know that if you own a Tesla and Elon Musk doesn't like you, he can press a button and your Tesla doesn't work? Did you know that? No, this is a fact. And they use this. I mean, if you buy a second-hand Tesla and you don't service it with Tesla, they switch it off. So it never starts. You can plug it in, charge it, doesn't start. Now, something else you don't know. 25% of the revenue of Tesla doesn't come from selling cars or selling spare parts for the cars. You know where it comes from? It comes from knowing what music you are listening to, where you are visiting your friend Mary, what kind of mood were you when you left Mary's house, what kind of conversation were you having with someone as you were going up to the supermarket or driving to the supermarket, what you purchased at the supermarket. By combining all these bits of information about your mood, your speech, because it hears everything you do in the Tesla, right? The Tesla is like an iPad on wheels. It knows everything about you. Through selling this data to Amazon, Tesla makes more money than it makes from spare parts. Volkswagen doesn't have that. Why? Because Germany has no cloud capital. There are only 2 agglomerations of cloud capital in the world. Silicon Valley and China. Near Shenzhen, to be precise. Come to the second question. Why did Elon Musk purchase Twitter? Do you remember when he purchased Twitter for $44 billion? Most of the newspapers were saying, oh, what a silly man, this is a vanity project, he's only doing it because he's a spoiled, overgrown child that he just wants to make a lot of noise through Twitter. This is all true. But it is fundamentally false in its essence, because the essence is, Elon Musk had every reason to purchase Twitter because he's a Johnny-come-lately to cloud capital. Before that, he was making cars, he was making rockets. This is old-fashioned terrestrial stuff, even though it goes to space. It wasn't cloud capital. He had nothing like what Zuckerberg had, like Google had, like Microsoft had, like Uber, Airbnb, this interface through cloud capital with us. And Twitter was the cheapest interface. And he is turning it, every day that passes, into an everything app, his own portal, his own Alexa, connecting it to his satellites, to his spaceships, and of course to his cars. And finally, why does this hypothesis help us understand the world we live in? What is the greatest danger for the world today? This is a rhetorical question, I'll answer it. A potential clash between the United States and China. Over Taiwan, over some pretext, the South China Sea, something. Now, recall that that was not in the air until 2017, after Donald Trump's election. Donald Trump comes in, and he starts the new Cold War against China. You remember that? Against Huawei, and aluminium tariffs and so on. I remember asking people in the United States, in government, in positions of power, people who supposedly knew, why is this happening? And they would say, oh, it's Taiwan. I said, come on, give me another one. China's position on Taiwan was always clear. Taiwan belongs to China. One China policy. It was the agreement between Nixon and Mao Zedong when they got together when Nixon went to China, famously. Right? It is the official policy of the United Kingdom, of the United States, one China. Whatever else they may say on the BBC and ITV and so on, this is the official policy. They haven't changed. They have not recognized Taiwan as independent. So that nothing has changed since 1971. So give me a proper reason as to why, from being absolute bosom buddies, the West and China turned against one another, or the United States and China. The second thing, they are building up their navy, and they are being very uppity, and they are threatening the national security of the United States. I said, I'll believe this when I see Chinese vessels patrolling outside Los Angeles. When I see that, when I see a Chinese base, military base being built in Tijuana, next to San Diego, I'll believe that. All I see now is American bases surrounding, around the Chinese coast. Nothing has changed since 1945. Look, I'll spill the beans regarding my own hypothesis. Washington, D.C., whether it is Trump or Biden, because remember, Biden comes in, and we all thought that Biden was the anti-Trump, who would reverse everything that Trump had done. Well, he didn't reverse the new Cold War. He turbocharged it. He made it far more acute and intense by banning the export of any kind of microchip to China. It's like telling Beijing, we are not going to allow you to become a technologically advanced economy. This is like the declaration of economic warfare against Beijing. That was Biden, it wasn't Trump. And now Trump is coming and continuing. This is a continuation of that. My explanation is really very simple, ladies and gentlemen, and this is how I finish. American hegemony rests on only one thing: the monopoly of international payment system through the dollar network. Manufacturing-wise, it's less than half the size of China, the United States. It's got a huge trade deficit. It has a huge budget deficit. The only thing that allows them not to care about their trade deficit or their budget deficit in particular, right? They keep increasing their budget deficit there as if there is no limit, is because other people pay for it. And why other people pay for it? Because when, a Chinese business person or German exporter sells stuff to the United States pays with dollars. Those dollars then go back to New York, and they fund the American government. This is the very weird recycling mechanism that has been unfolding since the 1970s. Washington, D.C. knows the moment they lose the monopoly of the international payment system of the dollar, they're finished, they're bankrupt. Have you noticed the rise of digital payment services? Who has the lead on that? It is the Chinese. Why is it the Chinese? In this country, there is no application that you can use by which to make free payments without being charged those awful charges, monopoly charges by Barclays, Lloyds, and so on and so forth. That doesn't exist. The free payments do not exist in the West. They exist in China because the Chinese Communist Party simply legislated that anybody who uses WeChat, a Chinese application, that is linked to any bank's bank account in China, is going to be free. And the Chinese central bank, imagine if the Bank of England allowed you to download a Bank of England wallet, digital wallet, from Apple Store or from the Android store, and that allowed you to to take money onto that wallet, to have your employer pay your salary there, and for you to receive the overnight rate of the Bank of England, which is always twice that which Barclays gives you for your savings, and allowed you to make free payments. You take it immediately. This is what they have in China. So Washington worries that, especially after the Ukraine war and the confiscation of the, $350 billion of the Russian central bank, a lot of people, Saudi Arabians, Emiratis, Indonesian capitalists, are shifting some of their dough from the dollar system to the one denominated digital payment system, which is free. And if that shift continues, they will lose the monopoly power that they have over the world's money. And that is a clear and present danger to American hegemony. So unless we understand the way that cloud capital has taken over, creating something that I call technofeudalism, we really can't understand the world we live in. And if we don't understand the world we live in, we can't fight for a better one. Thank you.